You follow your new discipline plan perfectly for 6 days. You wake at 5 every morning, train without excuses, eat exactly what you scheduled, refuse every distraction. You feel invincible, reborn, like someone who finally figured out the secret. Then, on day 7, something small happens. You sleep past your alarm. You eat something you said you would never touch again. You skip one session. And in that moment, the entire structure collapses. You do not just fail once, you fail completely. You eat everything you avoided for 6 days. You skip the rest of the week. You tell yourself that you were always a fraud, that discipline was never really yours, that you should stop pretending. This pattern has repeated so many times in your life that you have started to believe the problem is you. But the problem is not your willpower. The problem is not your character. The problem is the architecture of the system you built. It was designed to shatter. You created a brittle crystal plan in a world made of hammers. Every rigid system contains the seeds of its own collapse. The moment you treat discipline like a glass sculpture that must remain flawless, you guarantee that the first crack will spread into total destruction. Psychologists have studied this phenomenon for decades. They call it the "what the hell" effect. After one slip-up, the brain abandons all rules for the rest of the day to maximize the perceived ruined state. You already broke the rule, so why not break all of them? You already failed, so why not fail completely? The logic is insane, but it is automatic. The mistake becomes permission for catastrophe. This is paired with something even darker, called the abstinence violation effect. Breaking a strict rule creates such intense guilt that you relapse further just to escape the negative feeling. The shame of failing becomes so unbearable that the only relief is to fail harder, to numb yourself with the very behavior you swore to eliminate. You are not running toward pleasure. You are running from the pain of your own judgment. The ancient Stoics understood this mechanism 2,000 years ago. They called it the second arrow of suffering. The mistake is the first arrow. It hurts, but it is survivable. The real damage comes from the second arrow you fire at yourself. The self-judgment, the identity crisis, the belief that one mistake proves you are fundamentally broken. That second arrow is the one that kills your momentum, and you are the one holding the bow. Consider what happens after a long success streak. You build momentum for 99 days. You feel unstoppable. Then you stumble once. Suddenly, that single mistake does not register as 1% failure. It registers as total failure. Psychologists call this the 99-day failure. A long success streak makes a single mistake feel like a 100% catastrophe rather than 99% success. Your brain does not calculate percentages. It calculates identity. And if your identity is fused to a flawless record, one crack destroys the entire structure. This happens because rigid plans create what researchers call identity fusion. When you treat your discipline like a perfect, unbroken chain, missing a single workout stops being a logistical event. It becomes proof that you are fundamentally a failure. The action and the identity become inseparable. You do not say you missed a day. You say you are someone who quits. The mistake is no longer something you did. It becomes something you are. Think about the shape of the system you built. It is beautiful. It is precise. It is completely optimized. And it is as fragile as glass. This is the brittle crystal plan. Perfect routines are like glass. They are beautiful while intact, but they shatter into useless pieces at the first sign of stress. You cannot repair them. You cannot salvage half the structure. Once broken, they become worthless. Compare this to a different material. Imagine a rubber ball. When you drop it, it does not shatter. It absorbs the impact and bounces back. The fall does not destroy it. The fall activates its core property, which is resilience. This is what engineers and philosophers call an antifragile system. A resilient system uses the impact of a mistake to bounce back stronger rather than breaking under the pressure. It does not just survive stress, it uses stress as information. This is not a metaphor. This is a design principle you can build into your life right now. The most effective behavior change systems are not the ones that avoid failure. They are the ones that plan for it. They pre-program the recovery so that a mistake becomes a scheduled course correction rather than a catastrophic identity crisis. Consider how a GPS system works. You miss a turn. The system does not scream at you. It does not tell you that you ruined the entire trip. It does not shut down and force you to start over from your house. It simply says, recalculating. It takes your new location as a fact and builds a new path from where you are. This is the GPS reroute principle. A navigation system does not judge you for a wrong turn. It simply and calmly recalculates the path from your new location. Your brain is capable of this exact response, but only if you program it in advance. The military has understood this for generations. Special forces do not build one perfect plan and assume it will work. They operate on a principle called 2 is 1 and 1 is none. They assume the primary plan will fail. They assume the equipment will malfunction. They assume the conditions will change, so they build redundancy into every operation. They practice failure when nothing is on the line, so the response becomes automatic when everything is. This is the backup rule. The assumption is not that you might fail. The assumption is that you will fail, and your survival depends on what you do in the 3 seconds after the failure occurs. Stoic philosophers practiced something similar 2,000 years ago. They called it negative visualization, but it was not pessimism. It was rehearsal. They would sit quietly and imagine in vivid detail what would happen if they lost everything, if they were exiled, if they were humiliated, if their plans collapsed. They did this not to torture themselves, but to strip the future failure of its emotional power. When the event finally occurred, it was no longer a surprise. It was something they had already survived in their minds. This is Stoic failure rehearsal. Ancient Stoics practiced imagining failure in advance to strip the event of its emotional power and plan a logical response. They built psychological crumple zones. The impact was absorbed by preparation rather than shattering their identity. You can do this today. Sit down and write out the exact moment your plan will fail. Not if it fails, when it fails. What will the situation look like? What will you feel? What will the voice in your head say? Now write the next action you will take. Not the action you hope you will take, the action you will take. This is called an implementation intention. Programming your brain with if-then commands makes your recovery action automatic the moment a slip-up occurs. If I miss my morning routine, then I will do 10 minutes at lunch. If I eat something off-plan, then I will drink water and go for a walk instead of finishing the day in chaos. The command is preloaded. The decision is already made. There is no moment of hesitation where shame can hijack your behavior. This is how you replace a brittle system with an antifragile one. You stop designing for perfection, you start designing for repair. There is a concept used by engineers who run massive technology systems. They manage platforms that serve billions of people. These systems cannot go down, but the engineers know that failure is inevitable. So they do something counterintuitive. They decide in advance exactly how much failure is acceptable. They create what is called an error budget, a pre-negotiated amount of downtime or mistakes that will not trigger panic. If the system stays within that budget, it is considered healthy. If it exceeds the budget, they investigate. But they never treat a single error as catastrophic because they planned for errors from the beginning. You can build the same thing into your own system. Decide right now how many mistakes you are allowed per month without triggering a shame spiral. Not 0. That is a brittle plan. Maybe 2. Maybe 3. Write it down. When the mistake happens, and it will, you check your budget. If you are still within range, you are not failing. You are operating as designed. One of the simplest and most effective tools ever created for this is called the 2-day rule. You are allowed to miss your habit once. You are never allowed to miss it twice in a row. 1 day off is a rest. 2 days off is the beginning of a collapse. This rule is flexible enough to survive real life and rigid enough to prevent drift. It works because it replaces the perfectionist binary of success or failure with a middle path that humans can actually walk. Another version of this is the minimum viable day. You define the absolute smallest action that still counts as a win. Not the ideal version, not the version you do when you feel great, the version you can do when everything is broken. Maybe it is 5 minutes instead of 60. Maybe it is 1 page instead of 10. Maybe it is putting on your shoes, even if you do not leave the house. The goal is to make it nearly impossible to have a 0 day, because 0 is the only number that has no momentum. 1 is enough to continue the identity. The most dangerous moment in any behavior change process is not the beginning. It is the moment right before success, when your brain makes one final attempt to pull you back into the old pattern. Neuroscientists call this the extinction burst. Right before a bad habit dies, the brain triggers one last massive craving. It is not a sign that you are failing. It is a signal that you are winning. The system is trying to survive. If you know this in advance, the craving stops feeling like proof of weakness. It becomes proof that you are close. But if you do not know this, the burst feels like relapse and you interpret it as failure. You abandon the plan right before it would have worked. This is why the frame you use to interpret a mistake is more important than the mistake itself. Professional musicians understand this instinctively. When they hit a wrong note during a performance, they do not stop. They do not apologize. They do not restart the piece. They play through the mistake to keep the rhythm. The performance continues. The audience often does not even notice. Amateurs do the opposite. They stop the entire performance to dwell on the error. They announce the mistake. They make it the center of attention. The same principle applies to your life. The mistake is not the problem. Stopping to dwell on the mistake is the problem. There is an analogy that makes this visceral. Imagine you are driving and you hit a pothole. Your tire goes flat. That is frustrating, but it is fixable. Now imagine that after you hit the pothole, you get out of the car, take a knife, and slash your other 3 tires. That is what you do when you let one mistake become total collapse. The pothole was the first failure. Slashing the other tires is the second failure, and it is the only one that actually destroys you. The pothole analogy reveals the absurdity of the brittle mindset. Getting a flat tire is a nuisance. Slashing your other 3 tires in a fit of frustration is the definition of a self-inflicted disaster. You would never do that to your car. But you do it to your habits every time you let one slip become a spiral. Here's what you do instead. You build a reset ritual, a pre-planned 60-second action taken immediately after a mistake to stop a shame spiral before it gains momentum. It can be as simple as drinking a glass of water, stepping outside, or saying one sentence out loud. The content matters less than the speed. The faster you interrupt the spiral, the less damage it does. This is a psychological circuit breaker. It stops the fire while it is still small. You are not trying to undo the mistake. You are trying to prevent the mistake from becoming your identity. The most resilient people are not the ones who avoid failure. They are the ones who recover fast. There is a term for this: recovery velocity. True success is measured by how fast you get back on track after an error, rather than how long you avoided the error. A person who fails once a month but recovers in 10 minutes will outperform someone who fails once a year but collapses for 6 weeks. Velocity beats duration. Engineers who design bridges understand this principle in physical terms. They do not build bridges that are perfectly rigid. Rigid bridges snap in high wind. They build bridges that sway. The Golden Gate Bridge moves several feet in strong wind. That movement is not a flaw. It is the design. The bridge survives because it absorbs force instead of resisting it. This is the suspension bridge model. Successful systems must be designed to sway and move with the wind to avoid snapping during a storm. Your habits need the same flexibility. The sway is not weakness. The sway is what keeps the structure standing. When you build a system this way, something unexpected happens. Failures stop being catastrophic. They become data. Each mistake teaches you something about your limits, your triggers, your environment. You start to notice patterns. You adjust. You adapt. The system gets smarter. This is what researchers call post-traumatic habit growth. Small managed failures act like vaccines that build psychological immunity against future catastrophic relapses. You are not avoiding stress. You are using stress to build capacity. This requires a different kind of resource. You need an emergency fund for habits. Not motivation, not willpower. A reserve of pre-decided actions that you can deploy when your energy is gone. Just like financial emergency funds protect you when income disappears, habit emergency funds protect you when motivation disappears. You decide in advance what the degraded version of your habit looks like. You write it down. You practice it once while you still feel good, so it is familiar when everything falls apart. Then, when the bad day comes, you do not have to think. You withdraw from the fund. There is a concept in engineering called strategic inefficiency. It means doing a task just well enough to ensure it gets done on your worst days, rather than optimizing it for your best days. A perfect plan that requires ideal conditions is a plan that will fail. A good enough plan that works under terrible conditions is a plan that survives. You are not aiming for excellence, you are aiming for persistence. Excellence is the result of persistence, not the method. The final shift is the hardest one. You must stop treating mistakes as moral failures. A mistake is not evidence of your character, it is evidence of your humanity. You are not a machine. You are a biological system operating in a chaotic environment with limited information and imperfect willpower. The fact that you fail sometimes is not a bug, it is a feature of being human. The Stoics understood this completely. They did not aim to eliminate emotion or failure. They aimed to respond to it wisely. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. He was not saying that failure is fun. He was saying that failure is fuel if you know how to burn it. So here's what you do. You take your current plan and you break it. Not in practice, in theory. You look at it and ask where it will shatter. You find the weakest point. Then you build a protocol for that exact moment. You write down what you will do in the first 60 seconds after the failure. You decide in advance how many mistakes are allowed before you escalate your response. You define your minimum viable day. You rehearse the failure while nothing is at stake. You stop trying to build a system that never breaks. You build a system that repairs itself. This is not lowering your standards. This is raising your design intelligence. Brittle systems look impressive. Antifragile systems survive. And survival is the only metric that matters in the long run. You are not trying to be perfect. You are trying to be resilient. Resilience is not the absence of failure. Resilience is the presence of a recovery plan. Build the plan now. Write it down. Practice it once. Then, when the mistake comes, and it will come, you will not collapse. You will recalculate. You will reset. You will continue. That is not failure. That is discipline. And discipline is not a streak. It is a trajectory. One mistake does not change your direction. Only stopping does. So do not stop. Sway, bend, absorb the hit. Then keep moving. That is the system. That is the path. That is how you turn failure into fuel instead of letting it become your identity.